I obtain grace. I obtain grace to leave darkness and receive entrance into the light. I obtain grace to remain at peace. I obtain grace to hear and to obey the voice of the Lord. I obtain grace to finish. I obtain grace to guard my tongue. I obtain grace to guard my words. I obtain grace to be and to remain humble. I obtain grace to possess a positive mentality. I obtain grace to rule over and not be ruled by my spirit. I obtain grace to receive knowledge. I obtain grace to study. I obtain grace to condemn lukewarmness. I obtain grace not to be deceived. I obtain grace not to deceive myself. I obtain grace to repent. I obtain grace to become anew. I obtain grace to have a willing and obedient heart. I obtain grace to receive rest. Roundabout. I obtain grace to produce good results. I obtain grace to truly be the best me. I obtain grace to be freely free. I obtain grace to prove, yes, truly I am alive. I obtain grace to forgive. I obtain grace to give. I obtain grace to give thanks. I obtain grace to advance in life. I obtain grace to increase. I obtain grace to remain vigilant. I obtain grace to come back to the Lord. I obtain grace to stay focused. I obtain grace to wait on the Lord. I obtain grace to act when it is time to act. I obtain grace to speak when it is time to speak. I obtain grace to be quiet when it is indeed time to be quiet. I obtain grace to release my hope. I obtain grace to not allow the temporary troubles of this temporary part of life to be able to steal my joy. I obtain grace to remain hopeful. I obtain grace to be consistent. I obtain grace to be content. I obtain grace to be confident. I obtain grace to practice my crafts. I obtain grace to hold back no longer. I obtain grace to dream again. I obtain grace to be patient. I obtain grace to endure. I obtain grace to persevere. I obtain grace to be strong. I obtain grace to receive help when help is needed. I obtain grace to prosper. I obtain grace to rebuke and remove that which does not belong. I obtain grace to release my full potential. I obtain grace to go far in life. I obtain grace to learn. I obtain grace to be corrected. I obtain grace to be ready. I obtain grace to never give up. I obtain grace to ask questions. I obtain grace to be courageous. I obtain grace to pass tests. I obtain grace to stand tall. I obtain grace to stand firm. I obtain grace to obtain staying power. I obtain grace to be alert. I obtain grace to pay attention. I obtain grace to be attentive. I obtain grace to fulfill my destiny. I obtain grace to find my destiny helpers. I obtain grace to delegate. I obtain grace to have my eyes truly be open. I obtain grace to find my purpose in life. I obtain grace to leave my mark on life. I obtain grace to seek fulfillment. I obtain grace to shift upwards and to maneuver swiftly towards my goals. I obtain grace to never major in minor things.